I'm not going to commit to anything to you because you won't let me answer questions.
Okay, well then, we do understand that your current position is that you have a secret list of people or groups that you are accusing of domestic terrorism. So can we assume that you or persons under your direction at the Department of Justice have prepared that list of groups or entities who are designated as domestic terrorist organizations? And I just remind you, that's a yes or no question. Did you prepare the list?
I'm not going to answer it yes or no, but what...
So your position seems to be that if you falsely designate an American or an American organization as a terrorist group, there's nothing they can do about it. On September 25th, President Trump signed a memorandum known as NSPM 7, purporting to address domestic terrorism. But Americans across the political spectrum were immediately alarmed by the memo's blurring of the line between unlawful conduct and constitutionally protected speech and activity, as well as its call to investigate, prosecute, and dismantle groups that the president and Stephen Miller described without evidence as, quote, an organized campaign of radical left terrorism. Now, counterterrorism experts were further alarmed by the administration's singular focus on left-wing extremism, combined with the sudden deletion from the DOJ website of decades of research and law enforcement analysis, which had concluded that right-wing extremism poses the greatest terrorism threat to Americans. The president's memo broadly and vaguely links violent conduct to ideologies, and it targeted specifically anti-American, anti-Christian, and anti-capitalist beliefs, as well as, quote, hostility to so-called traditional American views on family, religion, and morality, end quote. President Trump has repeatedly and openly, however falsely, tried to brand his political opponents with these sentiments listed in his memo. But as you know, as a lawyer, holding beliefs that the White House disagrees with is not a crime. And the statute defining domestic terrorism requires criminal acts, not just thoughts and ideas. That's why legal experts, nonprofit leaders, religious freedom, and civil rights advocates immediately raised the alarm that the new presidential directive was a politically motivated attack on civil society designed to silence those who disagree with the administration. So, Ms. Bondi, Section 3 of that memo directed you, as Attorney General, to submit to the President and Stephen Miller a list of groups or entities whose members are engaged in acts that meet the definition of domestic terrorism. And then on December 4th, you directed the FBI to work with a variety of law enforcement entities to compile a list of groups and entities engaged in such acts by January 3rd, 2026, and to update that report every 30 days thereafter. So can we assume that you or persons under your direction at the Department of Justice have prepared that list of groups or entities who are designated as domestic terrorist organizations? And I just remind you, that's a yes or no question. Did you prepare the list?
I'm not going to answer it yes or no, but what I will say is I know Antifa is part of that. I will talk to you about that.
I'm reclaiming my time. I asked you whether you
an
prepared
Antifa member
a
was
list.
arrested in Minneapolis federal court for
my
cyber
time.
stalking.
Did you
they
have
ask a question
list?
and don't want an answer.
The answer is yes or no.
Time belongs to the gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Gentlelady can proceed.
Okay. So will you commit to providing this committee with any list of organizations that you have recommended be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
We will comply with the law in all matters.
Will you commit to provide this committee with your list of entities that you recommend be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
I'm not going to commit to anything to you because you won't let me answer questions.
Okay, well then, we do understand that your current position is that you have a secret list of people or groups that you are accusing of domestic terrorism, but you won't share it with Congress. And I'd remind you that when the US government designates an entity as a foreign terrorist organization, it must report that to Congress and to the entity, because the government can make a mistake and the entity has the opportunity to contest it. So your position seems to be that if you falsely designate an American or an American organization as a terrorist group, there's nothing they can do about it. I think we get it. You don't want to answer the question.
No, you don't get anything regarding public safety.
Thank you.
Nothing.
Thank you for the insult. It's clear you didn't come to Congress prepared to answer questions that the American people have every right to have answered, but If you were to prepared to answer truthfully, here's what we expect the facts to show. The administration is keeping lists of Americans who the White House says are engaged in domestic terrorism. Those lists could include Americans who have not committed any acts of terrorism, but simply disagree with this administration, people like Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And your list may include clergy, elected officials, and members of indivisible groups across the country. And those lists likely don't include Proud Boys or Oath Keepers who were actually convicted. Americans have never tolerated political demagogues who use the government to punish people on an enemies list. It brought down McCarthy, it brought down Nixon, and it will bring down this administration as well.
Pennsylvania Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon just unleashed an absolute political earthquake during a high-stakes House Judiciary Committee hearing, completely cornering Attorney General Pam Bondi over an incredibly alarming, unprecedented expansion of federal law enforcement power. The highly charged confrontation centered around the immediate real-world execution of National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, a highly controversial directive quietly signed by President Donald Trump under the heavy guidance of advisor Stephen Miller. Scanlon systematically read the receipts on the record, exposing how this new directive explicitly orders the Department of Justice and the FBI to build, maintain, and continuously update a secret registry of domestic organizations deemed to be security threats. The wording of the memo has sent absolute shockwaves through civil rights groups and legal experts across the United States because it deliberately blurs the line between illegal, violent conduct and constitutionally protected free speech by specifically targeting groups that exhibit anti-American, anti-Christian, or anti-capitalist beliefs, alongside anyone expressing hostility to traditional views on family and religion. The tension inside the hearing room reached an absolute boiling point when Scanlon brought forward a strict timeline, revealing that on December 4th, Bondi issued a binding directive ordering the FBI to coordinate with local law enforcement to compile this master list by a January 3rd deadline, with mandated updates required every 30 days thereafter. When Scanlon looked the Attorney General dead in the eye and demanded a simple yes or no confirmation on whether this domestic enemies list had already been finalized and delivered to the White House, Bondi completely stalled, declaring under oath, "I'm not going to answer it yes or no." Instead of addressing the massive constitutional overreach, Bondi immediately attempted to deflect by trying to turn the tables on the Congresswoman, claiming she would only discuss the inclusion of Antifa, before snaply stating that she would refuse to commit to turning any list over to congressional oversight because the committee wouldn't allow her to answer questions on her own terms. Following this chaotic public exchange, the real-world fallout across Washington has been swift and severe. The latest updates from Capitol Hill confirm that major civil liberties groups, including the Brennan Center for Liberty and National Security, have issued damning reports warning that the administration is systematically turning the machinery of federal law enforcement into a weapon against its political foes. Counterterrorism experts are raising red flags over a highly suspicious and sudden purge from the official Department of Justice website, which wiped away decades of public research and law enforcement data, concluding that far-right extremism poses the single largest domestic threat to everyday Americans. Legal analysts warn that by claiming the executive authority to covertly designate domestic activist groups and their financial donors as terrorists without any formal legal mechanism or notification, the White House has essentially built a fully operational, unaccountable political enemies list. Scanlon's fierce interrogation successfully stripped away the administration's defenses, exposing a terrifying pattern of institutional weaponization and ensuring that this massive battle over the survival of American free speech and civil society remains firmly in the national spotlight.